The year was 81 AD. The Roman Empire was still recovering from one of history's greatest disasters. Pompeii had vanished beneath volcanic ash, Jerusalem had been destroyed, and Emperor Titus had earned the love of the Roman people through his generosity and leadership. Many believed Rome had finally entered an era of peace. Yet behind the magnificent walls of the imperial palace, another storm was quietly gathering. On 13 September 81 AD, Emperor Titus suddenly fell ill while traveling through the countryside near the Sabine Hills. His illness developed rapidly, and within a short time, the beloved emperor was dead. Official reports described his death as a natural illness, but rumors spread across Rome almost immediately. Some whispered that the gods had punished him, while others claimed that someone much closer to the throne had ensured his death. Although no evidence was ever found, suspicion quietly settled upon his younger brother, Domitian, the man who would inherit the empire. Unlike Titus, Domitian had never enjoyed the same popularity. During the reigns of his father Vespasian and his brother, he had often remained in the background, watching power from a distance. Intelligent, ambitious, and deeply proud, he believed he had spent years living in the shadow of men who received the glory he deserved. Now, with Titus gone, nothing stood between him and absolute power. The Praetorian Guard quickly declared Domitian the new emperor, ensuring a peaceful transfer of authority before any rival could emerge. The Senate formally approved his rule, but many senators did so with hesitation. They remembered his pride, his sharp temper, and his desire for complete control. While the people celebrated the continuation of the Flavian Dynasty, Rome's political elite quietly wondered what kind of emperor had just taken the throne. Domitian understood that an emperor's first task was to project strength. He immediately reorganized the imperial administration, strengthened financial oversight, and launched major construction projects across the capital. Roads, temples, military fortifications, and public buildings were restored or expanded. Under his rule, Rome once again became a city of magnificent architecture. He invested heavily in defending the empire's borders, and demanded strict discipline from governors and military commanders. Corruption was punished more severely than before, and tax collection became more efficient. At first, many citizens admired these reforms. Markets flourished, public order improved, and the empire's finances became healthier. Soldiers appreciated an emperor who valued military strength, while ordinary Romans enjoyed the stability his government seemed to provide. To many outside the Senate, Domitian appeared capable, energetic, and determined to restore Roman greatness. But behind this image of order, another side of the emperor slowly began to emerge. Domitian believed that the emperor's authority should never be questioned. Unlike earlier rulers who worked alongside the Senate, he expected complete obedience. He increasingly referred to himself as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. For many Romans, especially senators who valued the old republican traditions, these words were deeply unsettling. An emperor had always been powerful, but openly presenting himself as a divine ruler crossed a line that many considered dangerous. His relationship with the Senate gradually deteriorated. Meetings became tense, disagreements were remembered, and criticism, however small, was seen as personal betrayal. Senators who once spoke freely now measured every word they said. The atmosphere inside the Senate House changed from debate to silence. At the same time, Domitian became increasingly cautious about his own safety. The violent deaths of earlier emperors, including Caligula, Nero, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and others, had convinced him that Rome was filled with hidden enemies. He expanded palace security, relied heavily on trusted guards, and quietly encouraged officials to report suspicious conversations. Whether these fears were justified or not, they slowly transformed the imperial court into a place where trust became rare. Within the palace, servants whispered carefully, officers watched one another, and nobles avoided discussing politics in public. A single careless remark could ruin a career, or even end a life. Fear had begun replacing loyalty, though many people did not yet realize how deeply it would shape the years ahead. Beyond Rome, new threats were also beginning to rise. Along the northern frontiers, powerful Germanic tribes were growing more aggressive, while across the Danube, the kingdom of Dacia was becoming increasingly confident under a formidable new ruler. These distant challenges seemed manageable at first, but they would soon pull the empire into costly conflicts that would test Domitian's leadership and further strengthen his obsession with control. As 81 AD came to an end, Rome appeared stronger than ever. The empire was wealthy, its armies remained disciplined, and its cities continued to prosper. Yet, beneath the surface, suspicion was spreading through the palace corridors, the Senate was losing its influence, and an emperor who demanded absolute loyalty was slowly surrounding himself with fear instead of trust. The reign of Domitian had only just begun, and neither Rome nor the Flavian Dynasty yet realized that the greatest threats to the emperor would not come from foreign armies, but from the people standing closest to his throne. As the years passed, Domitian's confidence transformed into something far darker. The emperor who had once focused on rebuilding Rome now became consumed by a single belief that enemies surrounded him everywhere. Every rumor sounded like a conspiracy. Every disagreement felt like betrayal. Every senator who questioned his decisions became a potential threat. Gradually, the palace changed from the center of an empire into a fortress of suspicion. To strengthen his authority, Domitian expanded the influence of the Praetorian Guard and trusted only a handful of loyal advisors. Secret informants quietly spread across Rome, listening to conversations in markets, public baths, and even private homes. Citizens no longer knew who they could trust. A careless joke about the emperor could lead to arrest, exile, or execution. Fear became one of the strongest weapons of the Roman government. The Roman Senate suffered the most. Many experienced senators who had served previous emperors suddenly found themselves accused of treason. Some disappeared without public trials, while others were forced to take their own lives to protect their families from disgrace. The Senate still met inside its magnificent marble chamber, but its authority had almost vanished. Decisions no longer belonged to Rome's oldest institution. They belonged to one man. Yet while political fear spread through the capital, danger was growing beyond Rome's borders. North of the Danube River, the powerful kingdom of Dacia, ruled by the brilliant king Decebalus, had become Rome's greatest military challenge. Unlike many tribal leaders before him, Decebalus united scattered warriors into a disciplined fighting force. He understood Roman tactics, fortified mountain strongholds, and prepared for a conflict that would test the empire itself. Confident in Rome's military superiority, Domitian ordered a large invasion of Dacia. At first, Roman commanders expected another easy victory, but they underestimated both the land and their enemy. Dense forests, narrow mountain passes, and carefully planned ambushes shattered Roman formations. Entire units disappeared into the wilderness, while supply lines collapsed under constant attacks. One of the greatest disasters came when the Roman general Cornelius Fuscus marched deep into Dacian territory. Believing victory was close, he advanced into a mountain valley where Decebalus had prepared a devastating trap. Hidden warriors attacked from every direction. Roman soldiers fought desperately, but confusion spread through their ranks. By the end of the battle, Fuscus was dead. Thousands of Roman soldiers had been killed, and the sacred eagle standard of a Roman legion had been captured, one of the greatest humiliations any Roman army could suffer. News of the defeat shocked the empire. For generations, Romans believed their legions were nearly unstoppable. Now they had suffered one of the worst military disasters since the days of Emperor Augustus. Across Rome, whispers began asking whether the gods had abandoned the Flavian Dynasty. Determined to restore Rome's honor, Domitian launched another campaign. Fresh legions crossed the Danube, new forts were built, and fierce battles continued for years. Eventually, the Romans managed to force Decebalus into negotiations. Peace was declared, but it came at a heavy price. Rome agreed to provide money, engineers, and military equipment to Dacia in exchange for temporary peace. Many senators considered the agreement humiliating. Officially, Domitian celebrated it as a great victory, organizing triumphal ceremonies and issuing coins proclaiming Roman success. Yet behind the celebrations, many officers privately admitted that Rome had paid its enemy to stop fighting. The emperor's carefully crafted image of invincibility had begun to crack. Military frustration only made Domitian more suspicious. He blamed failures not on strategy but on betrayal. Generals were questioned, governors replaced, and trusted officials suddenly found themselves accused of secret conspiracies. Executions became more frequent. Wealthy nobles feared confiscation of their property, while officers worried that a single military setback might cost them their lives. At the same time, Domitian invested enormous wealth into transforming Rome itself. He rebuilt temples destroyed by earlier disasters, expanded the imperial palace, restored public buildings, and sponsored magnificent games inside the Colosseum. Gladiators fought before cheering crowds, exotic animals arrived from distant provinces, and enormous public festivals displayed the empire's wealth. To ordinary citizens, Rome appeared stronger than ever. But beneath the glittering marble and golden decorations, fear ruled every corridor of the imperial palace. By the early 90s AD, many Romans had begun whispering about what they called the curse of the Flavian Dynasty. Vespasian had struggled through civil war. Titus had died suddenly after only a short reign. Now, Domitian seemed increasingly isolated, surrounded by enemies both real and imagined. Some believed the gods had turned against the family itself. Others dismissed the rumors as superstition. Yet the mysterious deaths, endless conspiracies, and growing violence made the legend impossible to ignore. Inside the palace, even Domitian's closest servants had become frightened. Chamberlains, bodyguards, secretaries, and senior officials all understood that the emperor trusted no one completely. Every day they watched another noble disappear, another senator arrested, another commander replaced. They also realized a terrifying truth. If Domitian trusted no one, then sooner or later, even those closest to him might become his next victims. Without realizing it, the emperor had created the very conditions that would soon unite his enemies. And the deadliest conspiracy of his reign was already beginning to take shape, inside the walls of his own palace. By 95 AD, Emperor Domitian ruled an empire that stretched from Britain to the Middle East. Rome was wealthy, its roads connected distant provinces, and its legions still inspired fear across Europe. To ordinary citizens, the empire appeared stronger than ever, but inside the imperial palace, fear had replaced loyalty. The emperor who once trusted only a few people now trusted no one at all. Domitian's obsession with conspiracies reached its peak. Senators, generals, philosophers, and wealthy nobles were accused of plotting against him. Some were executed after secret trials, while others were forced to commit suicide. Their estates were confiscated and added to the imperial treasury. Even members of the emperor's own family were no longer beyond suspicion. Every week brought fresh arrests, and every execution created more enemies than the last. The emperor also became increasingly superstitious. Ancient Roman astrologers warned him that a great danger awaited him during the month of September. Domitian, who secretly believed in omens and prophecies, became terrified of the prediction. He ordered extra guards around the palace, limited access to his private chambers, and constantly questioned his servants about possible plots. Ironically, these desperate security measures only increased fear among those closest to him. Among the palace staff was Parthenius, one of Domitian's most trusted chamberlains. Along with several senior officials, officers of the Praetorian Guard, and members of the imperial household, he had grown convinced that their own lives were no longer safe. They believed it was only a matter of time before the emperor accused them as well. Quietly, they began planning the very conspiracy Domitian had feared for years. The conspirators carefully chose their moment. On the morning of 18 September 96 AD, Domitian remained inside his private palace, believing the day would be like any other. One of his servants handed him a written message, claiming that an important visitor had arrived with urgent news. As the emperor turned his attention toward the document, one of the conspirators entered his chamber carrying a hidden dagger. The attack came without warning. Domitian immediately fought back with surprising determination. Ancient historians describe a violent struggle inside the room as the emperor attempted to defend himself. Hearing the commotion, other conspirators rushed inside and joined the assault. Within moments, the ruler of the Roman Empire lay dead on the floor of his own palace. He was 44 years old. The emperor, who had survived wars, rebellions, and political enemies, had ultimately fallen not to a foreign army, but to those who served beside him every day. News of Domitian's death spread through Rome with astonishing speed. The Praetorian Guard, usually loyal to the emperor, reacted with anger, while many senators openly celebrated the end of his reign. The Senate immediately declared that Domitian had been a tyrant and ordered a punishment known as damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. His statues were torn down. His name was erased from monuments. His portraits were destroyed. Coins bearing his image were melted or altered. Rome attempted to erase the emperor from history itself, as though he had never existed. Yet history refused to forget him. Within hours of the assassination, the elderly Senator Nerva was proclaimed the new emperor. His peaceful appointment marked the beginning of the Nerva-Antonine dynasty, an era that many historians would later call the beginning of Rome's Golden Age. Unlike the years of fear under Domitian, the new government promised cooperation with the Senate, greater political stability, and an end to palace terror. Looking back, many Romans believed the so-called curse of the Flavian Dynasty had finally come true. Vespasian had struggled to save the empire after civil war. Titus had died unexpectedly at the height of his popularity. Domitian, consumed by suspicion and fear, had been assassinated inside his own palace. In just 27 years, the dynasty that had restored Rome after Nero's fall had completely disappeared. Modern historians generally reject the idea of a supernatural curse. They argue that the dynasty collapsed because of political rivalry, absolute power, and the dangerous culture of conspiracy that surrounded the imperial court. Yet the legend continues to fascinate people because every Flavian emperor met a dramatic and unusual end. Domitian remains one of Rome's most controversial rulers. Ancient writers, many of whom belonged to the Senate, described him as a cruel tyrant obsessed with power. However, archaeological discoveries and modern research paint a more balanced picture. He strengthened the empire's economy, improved border defenses, expanded public construction, and left Rome financially stable. At the same time, his growing paranoia, harsh punishments, and distrust of those around him created the conditions that ultimately led to his assassination. His story serves as one of history's greatest lessons. An empire can be protected by armies. A throne can be guarded by soldiers. But a ruler who loses the trust of those closest to him may discover that the greatest danger is never outside the palace walls. It is standing quietly beside the throne.